I think she's starting this as the underdog, right? She won, and honestly, they should probably lean into that.
Eugene Daniels, Politico White House correspondent, co-author of the mightily influential Playbook newsletter, and as of a few months ago, new president of the White House Correspondents Association. Congrats on all your laurels, Eugene, and thanks for coming on Press Club. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing good. I'm exhausted. I had my first more than 3 hours sleep
Oh my
last
God.
night in a very long time. So I feel like a whole new person. Finally.
This is the reason I wanted to get you on to talk to you, because you've been covering the Vice President, Kamala Harris, for years now. And so first off, I'd like to congratulate you on suddenly becoming the most important reporter in DC right now.
No,
Apologies
no,
to
no.
the great Alex Thompson of Axios for a brilliant run.
Love him, my
But
bestie.
I want to start with, before we get into Kamala Harris now and what she's up to since taking over the mantle, I want to start with
Yeah.
President Joe Biden's exit from the race last Sunday, which I imagine has been contributing to your lack of sleep. How surprised were you by that when he announced on social media? Were you hearing from anyone on the Harris team or the Biden team that this was going to happen? What did you feel like when you saw that announcement?
I think not surprised but shocked, right? It felt like since June 27th, there was these moments where like, oh, it feels like he's good. Oh crap, it's bad again. Like it was just over. It was kind of
Right.
this whiplash that the Democratic Party was taking us through. And then after that convention, and you started to see like how strong the Republican Party was at least presenting itself. I was talking to Democrats who were like, it's over. Like by the time they get back, and they being members of Congress on that Monday after the convention, they are going to come out in full force, more publicly than they had up until that point. We ended up finding out that on Saturday, his closest aides, Steve Ricchetti, Mike Donnellan, showed him like the worst of it, right? Told him that the bad was coming from members of Congress, showed him how the path had closed in all of these swing states. And it was just too much. And it became very, very clear to him. Everyone outside of like a very small group, up until he pressed sent on that letter, was saying he's in. You guys are idiots. Like,
Right.
don't you dare say this man is leaving. And I don't fault them, right? They were working with the information that they had. It speaks to, though, how insular the already insular Biden camp had become, right? That even people who would have if this was 3 or 4 weeks ago, you talked to them, they would have known what was happening, what was coming, and they maybe wouldn't have been as full throated. I was on vacation with my with my husband's family in Minnesota. I had just come from Milwaukee, went straight to Minnesota. I was drinking a delicious ass strawberry margarita at Zorba's
Oh,
when the when the letter came out, and immediately I started calling people, one, to make sure it was real, because you never know nowadays, and people were crying because they were so surprised. Like one person I talked to was crying and said, we were promised that this wasn't happening. We were assured last night and this morning that this man was staying in. And so the speed at which it moved from him making the decision to them writing the letter to it going out was, I don't know that we've ever seen anything at all that quickly. He called the vice president. She was the first call of the people there was the people that made the decision with him, wrote the letter. She was the first call outside of that group to let her
got it.
know, like, it's you, kid. You know what I mean? I'm gone, and I'm gonna endorse you. And then her and her team and the Biden team were kind of off to the races at as of 1:46 p.m. Sunday.
Yeah, it was so striking how in the lead up to it, I had James Carville on this show a couple of
Yeah,
weeks ago, and he was like, "There's no way, it's over." But
yeah.
then I'd see a statement from Biden or Andrew Bates or one of the spokesmen for the campaign, and they would say, "Oh, he's never dropping out." And it was like I was so confused by it. One question I have for you is, do you have an explanation for us? And I'm open to it being a completely benign explanation for why Joe Biden, in the statement that he first put out, didn't endorse Kamala Harris, but then did so about an hour later or something. He put out a tweet saying he's endorsing Kamala Harris. Do you know why that was separated into two statements?
They have not answered that question, but what I
Yeah.
do have is an understanding of how they've operated in the past. So this is a kind of team, whether it's that small team or the larger kind of Biden apparatus that likes things to stand on their own. And so if you send out a letter that says, I'm endorsing Kamala Harris, the headlines and the messages immediately are Biden out, Kamala in, and they move on, right? Like that's kind of how it's going to happen. So they wanted to give some time for people to be like, President Biden is stepping out. But then, we're all like, oh crap, is he not endorsing her? Like this is going to be super weird if that's the case. And so I think that's it, right? That there is a kind of, we want this thing to kind of live on its own. I will say there are going to be many books and long form articles after this administration is done where people are going to be telling it all, right? Those top people are going to be trying to ensure their safe place in history of what happened and where they were in that process. And if, Vice President Harris were to lose, they're going, if Vice President Harris were to win, they're going to try to assure their place in the Democratic politics writ large, right? Because now they need a place to come to, and there'll be a White House for them possibly. And him letting that live on its own, I think, did cause a lot of confusion for a bit. But that's how they roll. They don't really care if there's confusion sometimes.
Once we got over that, I think there was a lot of fretting on Twitter and freaking out about whether he was going to endorse or anything. We got over that. I was shocked by how quickly Harris mobilized to consolidate support for her nomination in the hours after Biden dropped out. I'd say within 24 hours, pretty much, she had been crowned the Democratic pick. How did she pull that off? Yeah. Even less. Yeah. How did she pull that off?
Her team, as soon as she... it became clear that Biden was going, she basically just had her team her closest aides come to the VPR. I didn't really tell them why. And I was talking to one of them on Sunday, right as Biden's letter came out. And they were like, I was like, is this real? And they were like running and like clearly getting in an Uber. And I was like, oh shit, you're going to the VPR. That's, something's happening. And so, they mobilized her team. They had this list of, I think it ended up being at the end of the day, more than 100 top Democrats. And, that's members of Congress, governors, people like President Obama, for her to call. One, to make clear that she was running, right? And two, to make them feel good, right? These are the grand poobahs. And so if you want to sew up a nomination that quickly, you need to let them know, like, hey, I know this has been a tough process, but I think the thing that people said, what people said to me was, she said something along the lines of, I didn't want this day to go by without you hearing from me. Right. And so that is an acknowledgement from her and her team that they were, if not worried, at least making sure that there wasn't going to be some kind of fight. And then, calls to people like, the would have beens, right, of the 2024 and hopefuls in 2028 for sure. It is surprising how quickly they did it, because you're talking about more than 100 calls in 10 hours. She's walking around in the VPR with like a Howard University hoodie, some sweatpants. She was like hanging out with her family who was in town. Her brother-in-law and other members of the family were in town this past weekend. And so they're eating anchovy pizza. She really likes anchovy pizza for some reason. I'm not sure why. That face you're making of disgust is the one that I had when I learned that this was something she liked. Exactly. It's big weird. And so that speed was them acknowledging that they did not want this to be a fight. And she wants this, right? This is a woman who has run for president again. And also, for Democrats, I think it just is less drama for them. They've been through a lot since June 27th, right? And so it's being like, you know what? She's already here, right? Like she has the money, access to his money. She is popular enough with the Democratic base. She changes the electorate a little bit. So let's just not cause anything else.
It became so apparent in the hours after, at least to me, who is someone who's sort of watching it and not really reporting on it, that why would anyone challenge her? I mean, she had the support. It became insurmountable. Every single person that was being talked about as a potential challenger for the nomination was then being talked about as a VP pick to her. Right. I think, but so at this point, because I still get asked this a lot by people, and I think the answer is obvious, but I just want to ask you, because you're so plugged in, how certain is it at this point that she's going to be the nominee for the Democrats?
I mean, she has all of the commitments. You know what I
Right.
mean? And they're doing a virtual roll call, so we'll know soon enough. I think it's kind of over, right? Unless, I
Right.
mean, fate intervenes
Mm.
all the time. That has happened a lot over this
In the
or
last
this election,
2 weeks,
the
yeah.
last month. Yeah, so in a world in which we live, in which something crazy could happen, sure, it's possible. It just, I don't see how, right? Like the people who said um, that they aren't interested are already out endorsing and talking about going after her, going, the party coming around her and going out and wanting to campaign for her, sending emails asking for money on her behalf. And this is a party that is buoyed by Black people. I never thought it was going to be anyone but her if Biden left. There was never a time in which, we had all these conversations about, will there be a mini primary? I was like, if there is, she's going to be the nominee. Like the end result was always going to be the same, because if you hop, skip, and jump over not just a Black woman, but the Black woman who's been the vice president, if she was just random, if she was just a senator still, having a different conversation. This is a woman who has been serving as the vice president this entire time. This is someone who had already been running with this man. So if you're talking about 14 million people voted for him, they were also voting for her, right? In turn. And, there's still a possibility that she could lose. So if I'm one of these, other hopefuls who want to run, why would I only give myself 107 days to introduce myself to the American people, right? She doesn't have to really do that. She's kind of already there. But they are, if they were to hop in, let's say Josh Shapiro hops in, now he has 107 days to do everything you're supposed to do in 2 years. Getting all the money, introducing yourself to the American people, figuring out a convention, getting a running mate, getting around the country, doing all the interviews, all the sit downs that you need to do for people to get to know you. It's just the heaviest lift. And there's no guarantee that you would win. So it's you know what, maybe if we're not going to win, I might just stay and keep my powder dry until 2020, the end of 2024, and see what happens here.
Right, right. Now, speaking about her going up against Trump, the Associated Press had this incredible stat. You guys quoted it in Playbook this morning. They found that Trump is outspending Team Harris 25-1 on television and radio advertising this week. That's 68 million versus 2.6 million. Is that a concern for the Harris campaign? Are they freaking out about how they're going to take on Trump? Or are they just basking in this glorious news cycle that they've been bestowed upon?
I think they're in a honeymoon period, but they're also
Right.
aware they're in a honeymoon period, right? I don't think no one I've ever talked to that. It's also funny because it's you still think of it as the Biden campaign. As of today, Thursday, it still is xy@joebiden.com. So they're going to have to change their emails and all of these things. But I think they're figuring out what that's going to look like. They were already spending a lot of money against Trump, so I don't think they're going to have that issue. They also got $100 million in 24 hours. It is not going to be an issue for them to have money. The cash is there. The big dollar donors who were saying we're withholding our money unless Biden goes have started to release that, right? So it's not going to be a money question. It's going to be a where question. Where are the places that they feel like they played the best against Donald Trump? I think I don't know that they're happy to go against Donald Trump. I think they feel like, if it was, I don't know, Nikki Haley, it'd be a lot harder. I think, Trump Vance gives them, they believe, an opportunity to create a very different contrast of what the country could look like, depending on what happens on November 5th. They also like, the idea of running up a former prosecutor against a convicted felon. That is already a part of the messaging. And that the ability to message something that clean and that easy is a huge part of kind of how they're feeling. Their feelings are how they're feeling all hyped right now. Next week that could change, right? Something could happen and change that. The party might start infighting again before the convention or something. Depending on how the convention goes, also that could change things. But they're feeling I guess cautiously optimistic is kind of the vibe I'm getting from folks.
What's the team that she's putting into place like? Do you know how different that is going to be from the Biden campaign's team? Are they pretty much just importing the whole team over? Is it like a fresh start? What's your sense on that?
At this point, it's not a fresh start. It'd be impossible to be a fresh start, right? You're talking about hundreds of people across the country, not just hanging out in Wilmington, Delaware, in the headquarters. she's gonna bring some of her old people back in, right? You're I'll keep their names out of it, but there are conversations they're having with folks who used to work for her, where that she's very close to on the policy and politics front, that have kind of already been a part of it, and were helping her, even on debate prep, for example, when she was going to go against JD Vance. That are coming back closer. You can tell by some of the tweets that are happening and where some folks are that used to work for her, that they are now with her at some of these events all of a sudden. She's keeping Jen O'Malley Dillon and Julie Chavez Rodriguez, who are at the top there. Mike Donnellan, who was a key, I think he was chief strategist, was his title. He's not out. They bristle at that, the idea of him being out, but he is. They're working through what his participation is going to look like, but it will not look like the same as it did with Joe Biden at the on the top of the ticket. And so there's a world in which she needs to keep some stability, even at the top. But I would not be surprised if some folks get, if women can get some new friends in, right? There's a conversation about people like Jim Messina, David Plouffe, Jim Margolis, who did ads for Biden and is a huge ad maker and mover and shaker in Democratic politics, because they also want to make sure that the donors feel safe the entire time, right? She's not had the greatest relationship with the donor class, which is largely, white men. And so kind of getting some of the folks they're comfortable with as a part of this and signing off on this Harris campaign is an important aspect of how her and her allies especially are thinking about this.
I wanted to ask you a question about the Harris team from your perspective as a reporter, because I think it's safe to say that towards the end of Biden's campaign, there was a lot of friction between the Biden team and the press. And there were a lot of questions in the, and in the Biden administration as well. There were questions in the press shop about whether or not they were forthright about Biden's age and his fitness behind the scenes. And is there a better relationship between the press and the Harris team, or is there a lot of friction there? Like, how do they treat the press, and what does the press think of them?
Yeah. One, they have the normal, tense relationship with the press. Like, we want to know stuff they're trying to keep secret.
Always good to have that adversarial.
That's good. It's healthy.
Yeah, right.
I think it's largely that the press doesn't really have largely a relationship with her press team, and that's because they haven't been covering her, right? Like, someone like me who's been in these streets with her this entire time, my relationship, we tussle now. We tussle a lot. But they are forthright, and they make themselves accessible. That is going to be much more difficult with every human being that's ever written a word in American media coming and asking questions of them. I do not see them having that same posture as the kind of Biden folks had at the end, because a lot of that came from anger and fear and frustration with the situation they were in, right? Some of those folks were always like that, but largely the team was feeling, they felt under siege, and they were, by their own party. Things could change depending on how, they're in this honeymoon period, and so they're feeling all right. But if there's a flub, if the VP pick is the, quote unquote wrong person, if something weird happens and there's something in that person's background that they're not able to find in the speedy vetting that they're due, that could change. But I think largely they just don't have a lot of press that have been covering them. And, it's really interesting as someone, there's less than 10 of us who have been consistently on the Harris beat this entire time. And a few of us were at a rally in Milwaukee, and we were like, damn, this is real. Nice to see you here, everybody. It's fully a different experience. Yeah. And, things that you used to get, conversation that you were able to have completely exclusively, now they send that mess out to the larger group. So it's all of these things that are changing the process in which her team has to engage with the press, because there's so much interest. And a lot of people on her team have told me that, some of the phone calls they've been getting were really surprising. They forgot they didn't know if those people had their numbers anymore. But that things in the last couple of weeks, that's changed. So yeah. It's building up, that's for sure.
It's like, when you start seeing 10 New York Times reporters at the rally, the ship has sailed. Yeah.
Right. Something's happening. It's big different now. Yeah.
So who's going to be the VP? break
You know
some
what?
news.
I know. Um, I will say this. Obviously, no one knows who the
Hmm.
VP is. I don't think that they don't even know, right? Like they're still vetting a lot of these
Right.
folks
Yeah.
in the speediest way that anyone's ever been vetted. I think it kind of makes me think of the Sarah Palin decision, and that the vetting happened so fast, and some of the holes that were there were ended up being very obvious later, and the vetting wasn't that great, and other people thought one group thought they were vetting, the other group thought the other person was vetting, so there was a lot of that. I don't think that's going to happen here. But the things that they're looking for are likely. I would be shocked if it wasn't a white guy, um, because this is America, and there is the idea of putting two black people on a ticket, two women on a ticket, is something this country, many people in this country, are still uncomfortable with, right? And so it's likely going to be a white guy. Um, it's probably going to be someone who she's already been around a lot, right? Someone that she has some kind of relationship with. And then there's the question of, is there someone that can help her win one of these states that maybe she's not as, she doesn't play as well there, right? So you're thinking about people like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. If she's able to get Josh Shapiro, if you get Josh Shapiro as the VP and you don't win Pennsylvania, you are going to lose the election no matter what, right? He's very popular in that state. Someone like Mark Kelly in Arizona, right? Does that help shore up that? But now you lose a Senate seat, right?
Right.
Ward Cooper in North Carolina, also very popular in that state. Affable, kind of plays in the cut. He doesn't seem to have strong presidential ambitions for the
Right.
future.
Hmm.
All of those aspects are really important. The folks that are kind of in the Sun Belt are really interesting because now that it's her, she can kind of play in states that Biden had kind of already closed the door on, right? You're talking about Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina. Um, they have to pick so fast they have like a couple of weeks because of how the rules work for the party. So we're going to get an answer here very soon. But the race is on. You see Andy Beshear from Kentucky, the governor, doing like every TV hit. I ain't seen him on TV this much ever. Doing TV hits, attacking JD Vance. To sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. And the delivery. But you can see the tryouts, right? Like Tim Walz doing a lot of TV. Folks who are making it clear, like we're interested. You see people like Mark Kelly, maybe shifting some of their policy ideas about
Right.
labor, for example, right? All those things are happening because their allies are also working the VP's team, VP Harris's team, on like, oh, but you gotta love him. Oh, wait, you thought he didn't like labor? Hey, go change that. So those are the things that are happening right now. It's very like House of Cards scandal Veep all rolled into one.
I got to say, Andy Bashir have not been impressed by. He's been really trying, and he's been really going for it. You can clearly tell someone's trying to write those hits that he's doing. And he's not selling it. The couple of Tim Walz, I thought, is authentic.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we're having a sort of cable news Veep stakes now. Tryout. But what I find astonishing is that when I'm looking at Kamala Harris against Donald Trump, Trump is historically unpopular as a political figure, and he had, to put it mildly, a fairly wacky presidency. Left office on not great grounds. And yet a new CNN poll found that Harris is still down 3 points to Trump nationally, although that's half of Biden's deficit was a week ago. What do you make of the polling at this point? Do you think that we're going to start seeing more momentum for Kamala Harris show up in the polls, or do you think that this is still going to be a huge uphill climb for her?
I think she's starting this as the underdog, right? Like she won, and honestly, they should probably lean into that, right? If I'm them, I would lean. I would just, you have 104, 5, 3 days, wherever we're at right now. I would just lean into that, right? Like, don't send the email that's like, we're desperate, give us the money. Don't be weird, but like make it clear that this is a race that has started so close to the election that they have a lot of ground to make up in different states, and they need people to do things. Because if you make people feel too confident, they may stay home. They may not go out and knock on doors. They may not, donate that money. I think, polling has been difficult for a long time. I think it's going to be really hard to get a sense of what the American people think about this race, because the fundamentals are changing in real time. Um, I think, my polling folks, they do a good job. They work real hard, but it's just going to be really difficult because it changes the electorate. So what they were thinking and the people they thought they should be polling a lot for this election, now you have to expand that out to more young people, Black people, and brown people that she does better with, right? And that are maybe more interested in a Vice President Harris versus a President Biden going back to the White House. And we are going to see her get a bump likely here. The excitement this week, it'd be insane not to, but 3 points in just a few days into Biden's deficit is huge. And that's before, they haven't really done any paid advertising at this point. So you're talking about, $1 billion+ over the next 100 something days that is likely to be spent by her campaign and the kind of Democratic and liberal apparatus. That will matter quite a bit. And you can, if you mess up in 3 months, that would be hard to do. That's a tough hill to climb anyway. But the ability to focus on all of this right as the American people actually start paying attention to this election may or may not show up in the polling. But we'll get the real answer on November 5th.
All that said, there's an ABC News debate between Trump and now Kamala Harris that's going to happen in the next few weeks. I think it's at the end of August, maybe early September. And then Fox News has just invited Trump and Harris on for a third debate. Given that she's the underdog now, do you think that's something that she should consider doing? Should she do that Fox News debate? And do you think it's going to happen?
Should she do the Fox News debate? You know what? I don't see why not. I think, first of all, I'm someone who thinks they should debate all day, all the whole damn time, right?
Prove you can do it.
People, exactly. The American people deserve to see what they're getting up close. There's no better kind of test of how these people are going to interact with world leaders across the stage and what they're going to do when things get tough than watching them debate someone who hates them, right? That understanding what they're going to be doing in the future is key. I think she should. I don't know why she wouldn't. I mean, it's Fox News, so they have their own feelings about Fox News. But I think if you want to prove that you'll go anywhere at any time, then why not? At this point, they had only accepted, when she was VP, when she was the running mate, she had only accepted a CBS debate with whoever Trump was going to pick. Mm-hmm. And I asked her, I did a phoner with her about the VP pick that Trump was going to be making and the debate. And I tried to get her to say, will you do it? Would you anywhere, anytime with them? And she said, I look forward to that CBS debate. So, they're still going to try to be working that through, but there are definitely people in her inner and outer circle that are telling her, you know what, we should probably do it. We'll probably get a decision here pretty soon.
Meanwhile, Republicans are looking to cast Kamala Harris as the architect of the crisis at the southern border, which is a big issue for voters. A poll from earlier this year found immigration is the top issue for voters, and a couple other polls have found similar things. This became a media story this week because a bunch of outlets wrote fact checks insisting that Harris was never technically crowned border czar by Biden, that she was tasked with tackling the root causes of immigration in a few Central American countries. You've been covering Harris for all this time. Is that a silly distinction? How much of a role did she have in the response to the border? And are Republicans within bounds to refer to her as a border czar because of her role there?
She wasn't the border czar. It is, it's just not true, right? And I'm not defending Kamala Harris. If you go looking back, I've written some tough stories on the woman, but she just wasn't the border czar. I'll never forget, and I've been thinking about this a lot since they started the border czar talk. That first call, they had this press call. A background call about this before it came out. And they were very explicit that she is not handling the border, right? And if you look at the actual work she did surrounding immigration, she wasn't dealing with the border. She was dealing with the, root causes of immigration from Northern Triangle countries or whatever the long way of saying that doesn't really roll off the tongue as well as borders are. But when it comes to the messaging, just hard to, battling that, she's the border czar and then you move on versus actually we were we were dealing with the root causes of irregular migration from these 3 countries. That doesn't roll off the tongue as much. She wasn't involved in, that we can tell at this point, in any of those immigration policy decisions largely, right? She had this very specific role that Joe Biden also had. when he was running, and toward the end, or excuse me, and toward the end of the Obama Biden administration.
Mm.
That doesn't mean it's going anywhere. They know that. It has been a part of kind of her arc this entire time. You can remember, even when she was just the running mate, they were running ads against her and having her a part of the ads because it's a good tactic, right? Being like, both of these people messed this up. So they already have a big runway, Republicans, on this attack. It's not true, but, it's 2024 and some of that sometimes doesn't even matter.
Now, you reported last year that Harris, behind closed doors, was pushing Biden to speak differently about Palestinians and to get tougher on Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who spoke before Congress this week. And Harris notably skipped that speech, but she met with Israel's Prime Minister on Thursday. What should we expect from Harris when it comes to U.S. policy towards Israel? And do you think she'll be able to thread the needle in terms of appealing to young voters who are appalled by the war in Gaza and still maintaining Democratic voters who want the next president to be supportive of Israel? Do you think that that's something that she can do? And how do you think that her team is thinking about how they approach this issue?
Yeah, it's going to be backflips on on backflip, trying to figure out how you do this, right? The speed at which they have to figure out this messaging and how hard it's going to be is something I'm very fascinated in. We did that reporting, and me and my colleague Holly Otterbein, and it was clear to us, one, the Harris team did not want that out there. They didn't want that there was daylight between Biden and Harris on this. The White House did not want that out there. But there just is, right? There just is daylight between them on this issue. Biden has this really strong relationship and kind of weird frenemies thing with Netanyahu and have for a long time. And so she was saying things publicly about Netanyahu. And the way she was saying things was much different than Biden because they don't have that relationship. And she was kind of playing bad cop to his better cop. And she was the first one to call it a humanitarian catastrophe, right? Like upping the ante on what was happening to Palestinians. She's told her staff, she's told President Biden, other aides and allies in the White House and abound that they need to talk differently about Palestinians. That ended up happening, right? That they should be harder on Netanyahu. That ended up happening, right? I've been told that she is not going to flip the table because she's still vice president. So there's an awkwardness there. Biden has to be able to still get that ceasefire in the way that he wants to. And so, I think I will say they were not frowning this week when I was saying that there was daylight between the two of them on this issue. The Harris's team and her allies, they weren't pissed about it anymore. So that part is it's clear they want to make it obvious, but how they do it is still uncertain for them and going to be fascinating to watch for us. I will say on the issue of Israel and Palestine, or Israel and Hamas's war, when you look at the polling, the amount of people who say it's their top issue is actually a subset of a subset of a subset. And so it's going to be more about how you message what the future might hold, right? How you are not so particular about this war, but more about the treatment of Palestinians, what happens the day after, which is something Vice President Harris has been kind of obsessed with from the beginning of this war. And kind of, she went to Dubai and in her speech talked about that, we need to figure out the day after, and worked with all the stakeholders. So she's already been moving forward with that. I don't know how that is a tough needle to thread, because you got to let the current there's one president at a time in all things, but definitely when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting to see how she runs for president while serving as vice president. That's a really interesting point. I want to talk about. That doesn't happen often, right? People, you don't have to go talk bad about the guy's policies and then go in the Oval Office typically, right? Biden on debate stages during the primary talked about Obama and his immigration policy, and basically said that they'd made a mistake. Deporting too many people. He didn't have to go hang out with Obama the next day. She has to go back to work every day that she does an interview, every day that she does a speech and a rally. So she has to, on all policies,
distinguish but not distance, right? That is something that I've talked to chiefs of staff for Al Gore, and that's kind of the key. And the communication between the teams is gonna have to be much more important. The good news for her is that there's not a lot of time, right? So like, there's only so many times this is gonna pop up, and she's gonna have to do it.
Yeah, I think the short runway is a huge, huge help to her.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about you, Eugene.
I was enjoying talking about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden.
No, we have to talk about you. I want to get to the personality. I want to know what makes Eugene Daniels. Now, I was reading about you. I didn't know this. Your dad was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. You were committed to playing D1 football. You're from Texas. You're the star football player. Dad's in the Army. You're the all-American dream, Eugene.
Thank you very much. My family likes to think so.
Why did you get into journalism?
When I was a kid, I was kind of a nerd. And so when people would ask what I wanted to do, I would actually say I wanted to be a lawyer, I wanted to be a politician, and I wanted to be the first Black president. That was like, as a kid, I was saying that. They were like, okay, you don't do like an astronaut? And I was like, no. Jet pilot? No. And I kept that kind of in my head until college, actually. And I'm sitting in a class called the Politics of Special Interest Groups at the time. And I realized that I cannot, in good conscience, like do the things that politicians feel like they need to, often end up doing to kind of deal with that, right? Hanging out with lobbyists too much, taking weird money, the dark money thing. Like, it just like really bothered me. So I left, and I'd taken one journalism course kind of as an elective. And the woman, I fell in love with her. She wasn't a like advisor of mine, but I just become close with her. And I just thought she was so smart. Ms. Pam Jackson. I go to her and I say, oh my God, what I do, my dream is over. I have to leave college now. Meanwhile, I'm also playing football at the time at college. So I'm like, clearly there's other things happening. But she said to me, maybe you don't want to be a powerful person. Maybe you want to hold powerful people accountable. And that was it. Like that, it like clicked in my head. And I just like, dove headfirst into figuring out how I could do journalism, right? Not what it meant. And I knew all that, like how I would be able to do it. I did everything at student media at Colorado State University, where I went to. I took all the classes. I did the radio. I had a radio show called Out of Sight, Out of Mind. I did the CTV, which was doing the anchoring. I wrote for the newspaper. I wrote for the magazine. I had this late night talk show called Daniels After Dark.
Oh my God. Is that available still? Can we get Daniels After Dark online?
Beyonce has been good to me. I have not been able to find it. I am so happy
so far.
I went to college with. So far. Now that I said that, I know people are going to go look for it. But it was just about like trying to figure out what did that look like for me, and like how did I fit in to the kind of larger question of journalism, because it also, even at that time when I was, in the closet and, I was just a big Black guy, there's still like, there weren't a lot of people doing the work at all. And so I went to local TV right after college in Colorado Springs. And I started as a producer. I did the overnight, which is way too much power to give a 23-year-old. Like, we didn't have any supervision. So we'd come in around 11 and just write the show. At 4:30 to 6, I was on, the folks were on the air. I did assignment managing. I did some MMJing, and I got on camera a couple times. And when I was wanting to be on camera full time, because I wanted to be a TV reporter at the time. And I went through all the hoops that everyone did. I met with I figured out how to do a package and the voice coaching. And after all of that was done, I went to the general manager. I'm like, deal me in, coach. Like, everyone had been like, you got to get him on. He would be great to have the support of the newsroom. And I went to the general manager of the station, and he said to me that my voice was too Black to be on air full time in Colorado Springs.
Oh my God.
Yeah, weird, right? And so at the time, this is like 2013, maybe 2014. So it's a different world now, right? Like, now I think a lot of young people would feel empowered to be like, oh, hell no.
Yeah, I'm tweeting that out, getting this guy fired.
I'm telling everybody. And so I just left and just like went back to work. And, I thought like maybe this isn't for me because if he thinks that and also, it just was at, at most, obviously it was racist and jacked up for him to say that.
Mm-hmm.
At the very least, it was just bad advice. It wasn't like it didn't give me
Right.
anything to work with, right?
Right.
So what I would learn from that is like a lot of people are going to have a lot of opinions. Um, you don't have to listen to all of them, right? Like not all of the opinions serve you. Don't have blinders on and think you know everything. But like if there's an outlier, and he was an outlier, and has been an outlier for a very long time, then maybe you have it right. And I think about something my mom said when I was younger, and she said, I was going through a tough time, and she said, "Don't who cares about these local yahoos? One day the world will take notice." I don't know what she meant at the time. I still don't really know what she meant, but what I took from that is like, stay focused, right? Like stay focused on what you're trying to do, because a lot of people have a lot of opinions, and you don't have to take it all in.
My last question. You're now co-author at Playbook, which is one of the most influential perches in American political journalism. So your mother was right. What's your reporting process? Are you someone who just calls as many as people as possible? Are you taking out sources to drinks? Like, what's your process for getting news and reporting it out?
Yeah, I was on the video team at Politico before I joined Playbook, which so the change has been kind of head spinning. And so I took a little about what everyone did. So all of what you said: drinks, coffee, lunch, dinner. Not the club because I'm too old. The phone calls all day. Something that Yamisha Sindor told me before was she would wake up in the morning and just like write down a list of people to call that day. And so I've done that, like just checking in with people all the time. And when you have, I was covering everything Biden, Congress, the Playbook, we do it all. But I was the only person at Politico really that was like tied to Vice President Harris this entire time. So I had a lot of leeway to play, and that was great, right? Because the storylines there kind of went on forever, and were themes that were always around. And so like that, I think that made it easier. I didn't feel like I was diving headfirst. I felt like I had jumped in, and figuring out how you do sourcing, who you should source up with, right? It changes depending on what you're covering. And when you cover a White House, outside in is always better. So lots of advocates, lots of allies of Biden and Harris. As soon as someone goes into that White House and we get one of those readouts of the folks in the meeting, I'm texting and calling and looking for that number, because that's the best way I have found of getting any kind of information. This White House, unlike the Trump White House, is like, it's not leak proof, but it is like really difficult to get things outside from inside there, because they kind of all have this like, we're moving toward the same goal thing that they have going on. But it's exhausting, but it's exhilarating in all of the ways that you could think of. Yeah, I'm having fun. I'm exhausted. I don't know if you can see the bags under my eyes.
No.
But thank you. That's the concealer. But it's been, it continues to be this like really exciting ride. And I am also lucky to be, there's not very gay Black men who do political journalism, right? And so like that aspect of it, and the kind of little fraternity of us that there are, and getting advice and talking to them as I walk through this journey, is good. And I always think about this advice that my mom gave me when I was a kid. She's very good at advice. You don't always know what it means, and sometimes you never figure it out, but it sounds good. She said, "You belong in every single room you find yourself in." And so like
I like
that's
that
the
one.
thing that isn't that good. Leah
Yeah.
Daniels, shout out.
I could
So that
imagine it
is
has
the
a
thing.
downside. I've been in some rooms that probably I shouldn't be in. And
Weird rooms, yeah, weird rooms, yeah, yeah. It only works if you're going in the right rooms,
in
I
the right
think.
room, yeah, then it's good.
Exactly. But that aspect of it has made it like the idea of sourcing up, and the idea of going and yelling a question at the vice president or the president, or sitting down across from them and doing an interview. It makes all of it less daunting, right? And that's like my favorite piece of advice that I've ever gotten, and that's kind of the thing that kind of it also kind of keeps me. I feel like I'm pretty normal. This is kind of a DC is a little crazy, so I try to stay as normal as possible as it's happening.
Eugene Daniels, thanks so much for coming on Press Club. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, friend.